Without a shadow of a doubt, it's the Crockett Show in social media history. I want to welcome you to another episode of the War Zone. I got my guests in the building tonight, Deidre Gilbert and Daniel Miller. And you know me, I'm the 5-star general. One's running for governor, the other one's running for lieutenant governor. And they say the rhinos got to go. Well, guess what? Tonight we're going to give you a chance to show you why you need to put them out the building. Y'all kick back. It's going to be a good one. Say, man, I want to welcome you to another episode of the War Zone and tell you thank you for taking the time out to tune in. You know, without you guys, I would not have a show. And I really appreciate you just finding the time to hang out with me, because, you know, some days I can really be a handful. I can really be a handful. But tonight I think we're going to get some real informative information. We know tomorrow is election day, and it's a very, very pivotal day tomorrow. We can change the course of the state of Texas with just going into the voting booth and doing what we need to do. If you're sick and tired of being sick and tired, tomorrow you got some medication to deal with your sickness, and it's called exercising your right to vote. Tonight we got two interesting individuals here that I truly admire. I don't get to talk to one of them as much, and my first time meeting the other one, but you know what? It's okay, because you're going to understand why I endorse both of them. I could have endorsed anybody I wanted to endorse, but I actually endorsed both of these two good people in the races that they're running in. And tonight you get to meet them. Tonight's guest is my good friend Deidre Gilbert, who's running for the governorship of the state of Texas, and my man Daniel Miller, who wants to be a running buddy at lieutenant governor. How y'all doing tonight?
Doing great.
Doing great.
Well,
thanks for having us on.
Say, man, anytime. You're welcome to come by the War Zone anytime. I give you a lot of brownie points. A lot of people scared to sit in that seat. A lot of people scared to sit on the screen because they feel the questions are unscripted and they don't know what I'm going to ask them. I'm always asked the questions that the people want to ask, or I'm going to allow the people to put their questions in the chat, and I just put them up and I read them for them. So it's not hard to sit in that seat if you're being truthful. Now, if you're a pathological liar, it's going to be a tough situation. Because you lie, you know, my mama used to tell me, the problem with lying is you forget the first one. When you forget the first one, you're stuck in. So I'm going to give the floor to you guys. I'm going to let the ladies start off first. My good friend Deidre, tell them what you're running for, who you are. Give them a little background on you.
Well, I'm Deirdre Gilbert, and I'm running for governor of the state of Texas, and I am on the independent ticket. I'm an independent candidate. I have about 40 years of experience in the political arena. Although I have not held an office, I've been around it, in it, all through it. My mother was a politician, so I do know the good, bad, and the ugly and the inside of the political arena. I, have a master's degree in educational administration. I have my bachelor's degree in political science, mass communications. I did run for political office in 2018 for Justice of the Peace in Fort Bend County. And so I am running for the governor of the state of Texas. And I know a lot of people would say, well, how did you just jump from all the way from down here to all the way to the very top? And the first thing I say is that if you look at the basic qualifications of a governor, you will basically see that anybody can run for this particular office. And so I'm not running because I don't believe that I have experience, but I am saying that because of the basic experiences, I do know that I do have those particular qualifications to sit in that seat. So that's who I am right now. And I'm running for, as I said, I am not going to be on the March ticket ballot on tomorrow. I will be on the November ballot. Now, I have been a Democrat all my life, as people probably want to know. And 2 days prior to the filing date, because I was being squeezed in, and I knew that I would probably not have a great chance of getting out of the primaries. Our team decided that we would go independent. And so that's where I am. I am sitting on an independent ticket in a place that I've never been, but I believe that we probably will have a very good chance of giving them a run for the money. So that's who I am right now in a nutshell.
Okay. How you doing, Daniel? Fill them
I'm,
in, let them know who you are and what you're running from, my friend.
I'm great. I got my cup of coffee, man, and I'm in a comfortable chair and not in a car, so that makes me happy. Yeah, and thanks, Jerry. My name is Daniel Miller, and I am a sixth-generation Texan. My ancestry actually here in Texas goes all the way back to the Battle of San Jacinto, fighting alongside Sam Houston. So not liking tyrants and dealing with abusive and overbearing government runs in my DNA. But beyond that, I'm a husband. I'm a father by trade. I'm a technology consultant. I've been involved in the tech sector since the mid 1990s. And most people probably know me, though, for what I did in 2005, which was I founded an organization called the Texas Nationalist Movement. If you've heard the word Texit and know what Texit is, well, you're welcome. That's what we did. But since 2005, as president of the TNM, I have fought some extremely difficult battles all throughout the state legislature, whether it be over the issue of protecting the Alamo, whether it be gun rights, or just upholding people's fundamental right to choose their own government under Article 1, Section 2 of the Texas Constitution. We've been there. We've been on the front lines, mustering troops. And since then, the TNM has grown to be the single largest political advocacy organization in Texas outside of the two major political parties. So it has been just an absolute joy and pleasure to helm that organization. But starting somewhere around the beginning of last year, State Representative Kyle Biederman filed the Texas Independence Referendum Act, which was a bill that I actually authored. But he filed that piece of legislation. And as we were going around Texas touring, talking about the abuses of the federal government and how Texas would be better off as an independent nation, I kept getting asked specifically if I would challenge Dan Patrick to run for lieutenant governor. And, other than being an oddly specific request, it was definitely one that was just repeated over and over and over. That culminated sometime about September in an open letter submitted by a bunch of conservative groups, Republican groups, precinct chairs, county chairs. I mean, just a whole litany of people throughout Texas specifically asking me if I would run, citing Dan Patrick's failures on the border, his failure to do anything substantive about property tax, the COVID lockdowns, the vaccine mandates, the list goes on and on. So, look, anytime Texas has called me to serve, including in 2005 when we started the TNM, or when I started this journey on Texas independence on August 24th, 1996, when Texas calls, I answer. And so I threw my hat in the ring to challenge Dan Patrick and become the next lieutenant governor of the great state of Texas.
Well, I appreciate that. We're going to jump right into it, man. I think one of the elephants in the room is protecting the borders. I mean, we've seen, especially in Houston, who's been hit probably the hardest this year in the state of Texas, with police officers being murdered by, it looks like, immigrants or whatever they want to call them. How do we do a better job? How do you guys plan on doing a better job of protecting the borders? Because the open borders seem to be a major problem at this moment. How do we do that? I'll start with Deidre first.
Okay, so basically, I look at the system that's already set in place. So basically, you have a government, or you have to look at how are they getting here in the first place? How are they walking across water and all of this land, and even reaching this close to, to Texas? So basically, is somebody bringing them here? Or is somebody putting them on boats and letting them get off at a certain area? Because you surely can't walk the waters, and you surely can't walk all of that land without passing out and dying, which is what has been occurring prior to all of these people actually hitting land here in the state of Texas. So it's a federal issue, first and foremost, which is with your governor and having the ability to sit down with your president. However, they don't get along at all. So the first point is to be able to have conversations with your president and finding out what you can do. But in this particular instance, our president doesn't get along with the governor, and the governor doesn't get along with the president. And so you have a problem in the first place because nobody wants to talk to one another and come up with a solution as to what is really going on and how these people are reaching the states. Now, I've seen several people who have been here for quite some time who are undocumented. And we have to look into how in the first place were they allowed to get into big businesses and work here in the state of Texas, undocumented for a very long time. And many of the big companies were using undocumented people. Nobody monitors these systems. Nobody looks into it. And so therefore, you have a lot of people who were here prior to these people coming up on land. A lot of people are being driven here. They're crossing our borders. They're driving through on trucks. So basically, our infrastructure has a problem. The infrastructure that we have, the Border Patrol, something is wrong where it's missing, where we're not reaching or being able to stop what is coming here. And if we're allowing them to come over here anyway, my question is why are we so concerned whether or not they're walking, they're here now? And so I'm sure that Daniel probably has some suggestions as well, but I'm looking at the infrastructure as a whole. That first of all, we have an infrastructure that's broken. We have a system that allows immigrants or illegal immigrants, if you want to call it, or undocumented immigrants to come here to work in our communities because the state of Texas receives a lot of money for that. They get a lot of money for that. You have big businesses who benefit from that as well, especially when they can't find anybody else to work. So we have a broken system that needs to be fixed.
Daniel, how do we deal with the border situation?
Well, let me ask you a question first. Would you consider 100,000 Russian troops pouring into the Ukraine? Would you consider that an invasion?
Yep.
Okay. Well, understand that 160,000 illegal immigrants aided by the criminal narco-terrorist gangs called the cartels,
yes,
facilitated by the federal government and aided by the state Texas military department, 160,000 of those folks cross the Mexico border every single solitary month. So the first step that we have to deal with is we have to declare it exactly as it is, right? We want to call it as we see it and call it as it is, and it is an invasion. It's not simply a public health crisis or a public safety crisis or a national security crisis. It is all of those because it is an invasion. Now, I would not disagree with Deirdre that it is a federal problem, but it's not really a federal problem solely, right? It's a problem of the federal government's making. But it's a problem for Texans, right? Every town, because of the federal government's failed policy on the border, every town is now a border town, with Texas becoming one of the top states for human and sex trafficking, with all of Texas major urban centers becoming, number probably 1 through 4 respectively for human and sex trafficking. It is an unparalleled crisis that costs Texas taxpayers not just the $12 billion annually, but there is a cost of human lives. And it's something that the federal government has failed to address. Well, here's the good news. The good news is that in the absence of federal government action, it is imperative. As a matter of fact, it is a mandate upon the governor of the state of Texas as commander-in-chief to repel invasions within our constitutional duties. Now, that being said, the role of the lieutenant governor in this is to create the legislative framework and give the marching orders to the commander-in-chief and fully equip and expand the size of the military. It's one of the reasons our campaign has put forward the most aggressive border plan that deals with both sides of the equation. Number one, border security, and number two, inland enforcement. Now, the first part of the border security plan is quite simple from a state perspective. Right now, we're spending on average of about $3 billion in border security funds from state money, which has effectively gone to really law enforcement activities, aka sending DPS troopers from our communities, placing them down there about 20 to 30 miles in from the border and running traffic patrols. That's not a strategy. It's not a border strategy. That is what I like to refer to as the astronaut diaper method, right? Instead of dealing with the stomach ailment, you're just trying to catch the mess.
Yes.
Well, the real thing that needs to be done and what we've advocated for is shifting the majority of that funding to the Texas Military Department, specifically the Texas State Guard. Okay. Out of the three branches of the Texas Military Department, the Texas State Guard is the one that cannot be federalized, which is very important. But shift that budget to the Texas State Guard to fully militarize them, equip them, make them into a modern fighting force, which is easy enough to do. Number two, expand enlistment to include and prioritize specifically prior combat service veterans. Number three,
Right.
deploy them as a border force. So you complete the wall in sections where it makes sense, and then you treat it as an invasion, and you put Texas military assets on the border to handle interdiction. And the key part of this is that they must be deployed right alongside the river, so that we're not dealing with the catch and release program that we have right now, where they cross, they get in, they are apprehended by our Texas military or DPS, and then they're effectively Ubered on the taxpayer dollar to the federal government, who processes them, gives them more taxpayer money, puts them on a plane, and ships them all over Texas and the United States. That's got to end. We have to treat it as an invasion, belly up to the border, and we have to make absolutely sure we don't get crossings. Now, that being said, we also have to remember that the cartels have been firing on our personnel from across the border, which means our military needs absolutely clear rules of engagement that say that when those narco criminal terrorist gangs fire on our troops, we have the opportunity and the obligation to return fire and pursue to neutralize the source of that aggression. And if that happens to be on the other side of that river in that failed state called Mexico, so be it. That's just the impetus that Mexico needs to get their side of the border under control. The other side of that equation, and not to monopolize here, but I do want to be complete and thorough. The other side of this is we have to de-incentivize this issue. We need to make human and sex trafficking life offenses, if not capital crimes, when involving children. Additionally, we have to stop the flow of public goods and services to those who are not here legally, because it is costing taxpayers annually around $12 billion. So we've got to do that. To reduce the strain on our infrastructure, to handle all of those particular issues. So it is a two-sided equation that deals specifically with securing the border and then handling inland enforcement to make sure that those that do get here get sent back.
And so I also want to ask you something, Daniel, about the drones. So they have the capacity to, or they've had the capacity to use drones and other instruments to put this at bay, but this stuff has not been used. So do you think that that's something that needs to be utilized? Or I know that it costs a lot of money because drones have to have a person to actually, operate those things. But I'm thinking that there needs to be, somewhere where this stuff is cut off at the helm, before it even reaches the land. So that's another thing that I've been looking at or wondering. And so I'm gonna ask you, because you seem to know a little bit about this as well.
Yeah, look, it's abundantly clear that part of the challenge that we have down on the border is a lack of resources and manpower. Currently Governor Abbott and Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick like to talk about all they've done to secure the border, and they talk about Operation Lone Star, but I like to refer to it as Operation Chupacabra. because just like a chupacabra, their border strategy, a lot of people say that they've seen it, and when they describe it, it sounds pretty scary, but in fact, it really doesn't exist. And so when you talk about fully militarizing the state guard, you're talking about two things. Upgrades of equipment and upgrades of personnel, expanding that personnel, giving them, a livable wage, actual military equipment. And of course, part of that is engaging in aerial surveillance across the border, not just for the purpose of reconnaissance, but additionally for the purpose of neutralizing the cartels who are effectively doing this. A lot of this could be solved if, in addition to all of the things that I mentioned, if the state were to go in and declare the cartels as foreign terrorist organizations, because that would give us carte blanche, both domestically and internationally, to go in and neutralize the cartels on the other side of the border. So, if we're talking about reconnaissance efforts with drones, I think it's perfectly feasible, and I think it has to be at a minimum. That has to happen. But beyond that, if we're talking about fully militarizing our troops, if we saw the Chinese or Russians operating on the other side in an aggressive manner, or ISIS, we would not hesitate for a second to strike them with a Predator drone missile. We would not hesitate. And the cartels are just as damaging, if not more so, on the soil of Texas than ISIS or Al Qaeda ever were.
Absolutely. Okay. Thank you.
Jerry, you're a great mime, but I'm a terrible lip reader.
I think a lot of people didn't realize.
Don't do that. Hey, don't do that walking in the wind thing. We don't want to see that walking in the wind. Nobody likes that.
I think a lot of people didn't realize until the crime went through the roof down here in Houston that a lot of these people, well, I'm not going to say a lot, a few of these people that are coming across the border happen to be cartel members. And, like when the officer got killed, the constable got killed in Houston, and the guy killed him and automatically ran to the border. That's when a lot of people started waking up. I say, well, I tried to tell y'all, but you didn't want to hear it. So let's switch gears a little bit. The educational component in the state of Texas is a mess at the moment. It is actually a mess to me. I'm an education advocate, been that for 11 years, and I've never seen our educational component be at the level that it's at right now. I think that has a lot to do with the leadership of the Texas Education Agency, but that's a whole different discussion. How do you two good people, and we'll start with the lady again.
You keep putting me on the pot.
How do you plan?
Daniel is the one over the legislation.
Okay, we'll start with Daniel then.
Okay.
What's your plan? And it's only one thing to say. What's your plan to fix education in the state of Texas?
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, how much time do you have?
Go at it for a minute.
Yeah. I mean, because let's be honest. I think that everyone here in Texas can agree that we've got a serious public ed issue. And let me just be real clear. The Texas Constitution, Article 7, Section 1, guarantees a free system of public education, but geared toward the preservation of liberty, right? Article 7, Section 1 is very clear about the obligation and the rationale behind public education. But we've got a serious education crisis. We have got the social experimenters playing around with our future generations in our school systems, right? And so what we've seen this this challenge with public ed, particularly not effectively competing with other education systems and models. And so we've got entire generations of children being spit out of our public school systems, not ready for the future. Right. That being a tech guy, I'm obviously very sensitive to the issues related to STEM education. But the thing that we've got to admit is that competition breeds excellence when it comes to education. And we do not have competition in the public school system. Now, granted, some in public ed will say curriculum comes down from the State Board of Education. We know the TEA is a mess, and I'm looking at the guy on the screen right now that I would love to see replace Mike Morath, but that, again, is a topic for a whole other show. But but look, I am for school choice, and it is a situation. It's something that I don't speak about lightly, right? I understand the implications of school choice, but I also understand that competition breeds excellence. And what we've got to understand is when we have these areas where we've got schools that are failing, that are not teaching children, that are not teaching them properly, that are teaching our children more about it's okay to have more conversations about which bathroom you should use than what our Constitution says. We've got some serious upside down problems. So, I'm all about returning public ed back to its core functions: reading, writing, civics, mathematics, science, STEM education. Get the rest of this crap out of the schools where it does not belong. And when you trim it down that way and introduce the aspect of school choice, and allow parents to choose not only what their children learn, but where they learn it, you will see the competition breed excellence, and you'll see a renaissance of education like you've never seen before.
Well, I'm going to tell you something, man. It's like the second time I've heard somebody tell me that I should run TEA, and I'm going to be honest with both of y'all. It doesn't take a rocket science to fix it. It's really not that hard to fix education. If a kid is reading on a third grade level and he's in the seventh grade, what grade level teacher should he be working with? It should be, if you're gonna be in the seventh grade, one, I question how he even got to the seventh grade.
Yeah,
that's the first question. Then two, if he's reading on a third grade level, then we're going to have to bring in a third grade teacher to get him up to speed. And you're just going to have to keep making that go and go. But in the old days, if you didn't make the grade, you didn't pass.
Well, Jerry, that's social promotion, right?
Yes.
That's when the education system became inundated with the belief that it's more important that how your child feels than what they know. Right. It's more about compassion than competency, right? They don't want anyone to feel left out. Well, at the end of the day, and this is what I had to explain to my kids 6 times over, by the way, is that, look, how you feel in school is irrelevant to what you know, because the day you step foot out of that school and you enter into a university, or you go out into the job, out and get a job or start a business, no one out there cares how you feel. All they care about is, can you do the job? Can you do it? And if you can't do it, guess what? You don't get to eat, right? You're going to have a real hard life. And we've developed a culture that is manifested inside public ed that says that it is more important to make a child feel good than to know how to operate and function in society.
Well, I'm going to be honest with you. I'm old school, and I was raised by some old school people. They told me at a certain age, I didn't have no feelings. Just go to school and get it done. So my thing is, and I'm going to twist this up for you a little bit, Deidre, is one, I'm not I'm not the guy that's in support of all this state mandated testing. I believe that it's a money grab. I believe that when I decided to go back to college 3 years ago, the only thing they asked me for was an ACT and an SAT score. And then I had to take the TSIs. Okay, so they start testing. Oh, we have to figure out where our children are. Well, you just said they couldn't read. You should know where they at. So, Deidre, and then we'll slide it back down to Daniel. State mandated testing. A lot of parents, a lot of voters, they want to know where you stand on it.
Well, let me say this. So we talk about No Child Left Behind, first of all, when that came into place. And so you were asking, how are we moving these children through the system? So I taught for 26 years. I was a teacher for 26 years. And I left the system not because of the children, but I left because of the way the system was becoming. We were unable to teach the curriculum. We were no longer looking at these books that were coming to, because we had textbook committees back in the day. And I was a part of the textbook committees where we would go in and we would look at these things. So with the No Child Left Behind scheme that I believe Bush came up with, children were no longer required to do certain things. So they weren't required to, have to learn your ABCs and your 1, 2, 3s. And many of these children were pushed from one grade level to the next, regardless of whether or not, they should have been. Now, you had money. Money is another issue, the prioritizing of these, of these charter schools that came into play. And all of these people who wanted to make money on education. So you had a lot of money taken out of your educational system, funneled to charter schools. And it's, I don't have anything against a charter school per se, but they're no different than a public school, in my opinion, because I'm a teacher or a former teacher. So I understood, curriculum. I understood how to teach. Your next problem that you had, the monies that were supposed to be coming from our lottery system, that money no longer came to the system, but was actually funneled to hospital systems that are called trauma centers. So none of the, I'm going to say 90% of the monies that were supposed to be allotted to our school systems were going somewhere else that it had no business going to. And so therefore you didn't have what you need. Your testing, curriculum. I didn't have a problem with my kids passing a test. I'm going to tell you when I was teaching I'm going to tell you what I feel like the problem was. When I was teaching in HISD, many of the classrooms were what you call self-contained classrooms. The teacher had to teach every subject. Many teachers, in my opinion, I'm not, I like math. So I'm glad Daniel loves to hit the numbers, and want to work with the numbers, because I wasn't, the queen bee of mathematics, but my friend, she was great in math, but I still had to teach that in HISD. And so therefore, I was able to, I'm going to say, partner with her in that instance. But many teachers, they were self-contained and forced to really teach every subject. Well, if you're not really good in any, some of these subjects, then you're not going to do very well of trying to teach this and trying to do it in an 8-hour time frame. It's impossible. I didn't have a problem when I went to Aldine ISD. They separated the schools. So you had a pre-K center, you had a kindergarten school, you had 1st through 4th grade, then you have a 5th and 6th grade center. So they understood the concept long before HISD did. So I went to Aldine for 3 years. I had a great mentor. They gave us mentors where I learned science. I learned how to teach science like nobody else could ever teach science. And I'm telling you, when I came back from Aldine and came back to HISD, every last one of my students, regardless of where they were, they passed the test because I was teaching higher level thinking skills and vocabulary. You got to be able to teach the subject. When you're trying to teach to a test, you're not going to get anything done when you're trying to teach somebody how to teach from a test. And how did that come to play? Because they started pitting teachers together or pitting teachers against one another, let me put it like that, and giving them, incentives, money incentives of who's the best teacher or, and that's where we begin to falter. Because we begin to pit teachers against one another. Who's the best teacher and who's going to do the best? So you're going to get this extra money. There's nothing wrong with testing, my 5-star general. The problem comes in when you're trying to test to a test and you're not teaching curriculum. Now, curriculum became different because they allowed these people to come in to give them different types of curriculum, and the system just became crazy. And so when you have different people teaching different ways, nobody knew anything about the lesson cycle. I learned how to teach from the lesson cycle. I don't know if the new teachers even know what the lesson cycle is. Okay, so there is a lot of different things that are occurring within the system that has caused a lot of people not to want to test. I don't think people should have to test to pass, because everybody is not a tester per se. You know, some people freeze up. I didn't have to study very hard when I took a test, so it didn't bother me, but it bothers some of the other children because they just can't handle it. So is there something wrong with testing? I don't think there's anything wrong with testing. I think the problem came in when you don't teach the teachers how to teach curriculum. And that's me.
Well, I'm going to tell you something. I think everything rises and falls on leadership. I think when your leadership is suspect,
absolutely,
it's not gonna work right. You have a guy that's pulling the strings for the Texas Education Agency, Mike Morath, who's never been in a classroom. He's never been a teacher, never been an administrator, never been a principal, never been a superintendent. But yet he knows exactly what we should do with our children. And that in itself tells me where the problem lies.
And that's the problem too, Jerry, exactly what you're saying.
I think
you got a lot of people that sit there who's never been in a classroom, who has nothing to do, who know nothing about education.
You know,
I believe one thing that you need to do is to wipe the slate clean and put people up there who knows how to do that.
I sat with a principal today, and then we're going to switch gears.
Okay.
And the principal was telling me at this school where they had about 10 different fights today. And I just got sick of it coming across my phone. And I got up out the bed and I went to the school. The school was on lockdown. I basically knocked on the front door, tell the principal I need to talk to him. We went to closed door meeting, and he was telling me, I got to tell you the good things that's going on. You know, last year we had a kid that graduated from this poor black school that went to Dartmouth. I say, well, how many of them graduated, went to the street corner? How many of them graduated, especially the girls, and went to a stripper pole? You keeping up with that data? I say, because I see more of them than I see the ones going to these Ivy League schools. So the thing is it's not a cookie cutter approach to education, because no matter where you go, it differs. Houston is different than Dallas, which is different than San Antonio, which is different from Austin. Then we got our rural counties. Everybody learns at their own pace. So the thing is we got to look at our leadership. Now, also, because I'm big on this, I think the quality of life for our veterans in the state of Texas is not being appreciated to the highest level. A lot of these people, you know, went and fought in wars and at different times. God bless them. They did a wonderful thing for us as citizens of the United States. I think, and my question to you guys is, what can we do from a state level standpoint to better the quality of life for our veterans? Daniel?
You want to talk, Daniel, or me?
Yeah, look, I'm all over this one because look, let me just go back to that day, August 24th, 1996, that I mentioned earlier, and that's the day that I crossed that proverbial line in the sand and started fighting for Texas independence. And I'm going to tell you, one of the biggest motivators was the man who signed on right ahead of me, and that was my father, who was a Korean War vet, and he, you know, growing up watching what the VA system did to him, how they treated him and how they treated other veterans, is a big motivator for why I have a major distrust and dislike for all things federal. But that being said, you know, the current state of affairs here in Texas is not just solely a shambles because of the federal government. Just because the federal government fails doesn't mean that Texans are off the hook for taking care of the veterans. And number one, one of the biggest challenges that we've got right now are these veterans care homes, these veterans homes for retired veterans who have some of the highest mortality rates during the COVID lockdowns than any other place. That is, unfortunately, a situation here in Texas that we've got to address. But look, we've got a lot of problems with all of our veterans programs. If you go right now to the General Land Office, to the Texas, to the Veterans Land Board, you're not going to find any land available for the Veterans Land Board, but our state is more than happy to get land and sell it off to foreign Chinese investors.
Yes, they have.
And so, I mean, you literally go to the site and it says no land available, even for the veterans that want to do it. We've got challenges with getting veterans back to work here in Texas. Part of the challenge is obviously federal. There's these regulatory burdens for starting up new businesses or getting new hires. And unfortunately, Texas has some of those as well. So there's a lot that specifically we need to do to support our veterans. And a lot of that begins by making sure that things like we stop the sale of Texas land to foreign investors, like the Communist Chinese Party and guys like that, making it available for our veterans, lowering the barriers to entry for veterans to start new businesses, making sure that there are adequate connections to the Texas Workforce Commission to get veterans jobs, making sure that we get a full top-down audit and stronger oversight on the veterans care homes. I mean, there's so much. And I got to tell you, the other side of this, I'm going to bookend my statement with this, is it is also a particular concern because my youngest son is now currently serving in the U.S. Army in the 10th Mountain Division. So I am very concerned with what sort of Texas he's going to come back to as a veteran if he does not get the necessary skills in the Army, and what sort of benefits he's going to receive on the other side of the service that he's giving to us right now.
Okay, so with me, I presently work with what we call a homeless veterans reintegration program. It's called the Houston Launchpad. I've been a part of this, or it's been in existence since 1998. And what we do is we help veterans find employment, jobs. We provide supportive services, and we work in conjunction with the Department of Labor. The things that we were finding is basically what you were talking about, Daniel, which was providing the supportive services, the training programs that we used to have. We used to have the reentry programs. We have a lot of veterans who are incarcerated and who are getting out of prison and coming back into a system where there is nothing for them to do as it relates to finding a job. We are like one of 4 HVRP programs in Houston area, but we are the oldest program in the area. Now we provide training. We work with the Texas Workforce Commissions, the Veterans Commissions, and we don't provide them ourselves, but what we do is we refer out for the housing, for permanent temporary housing. We work and give them supportive services in the form of gas cards, bus passes. And we also provide training. We have 4 apprenticeship programs within this particular organization, which is a nonprofit. I think that is another key to trying to figure out how to help those veterans, is putting more of those programs back out into the area. Because again, in Texas, there's not very many HVRP programs like we are. They're very sporadic, but they're all across the country, but they're not in several areas where veterans need this assistance. So I believe that these types of training programs or this type of program should go back into state legislation so that we can provide nonprofit organizations to assist with this. And we must also have the oversight, though, as it relates to how it's run, because again, When money gets involved, a lot of people start taking money out of wherever it needs to go. A lot of the veterans that we have found, Jerry and Daniel, right now, were provided their unemployment benefits. Many of these veterans have been fighting for years trying to get, benefits or housing. Well, during the pandemic, guess what? They were able to get a lot of that. So we don't really have a huge homeless population like we used to have. I only believe that when we did the last survey, I'm going to say it was only probably 3,000 veterans that they had identified, homeless veterans out in the work, out there in the elements. They are living like they should have because they're now receiving monies. They are able to go to training classes. We have worked with HCC. Right now, we have 84 classes that we're partnering with HCC that provide training with 12 months of rental services for our veterans. Now, veterans need to know about these programs, but many of them don't. Many of them don't know that some of this stuff exists and that we can help them. We get money. We get $500,000 every year to work with these veterans. We have money. But I'm going to tell you what is going on with the veterans right now. They are living comfortably. Many of them are getting what they needed, their benefits, and they don't want to go back to work for $10 an hour. And I don't much blame them. So, I don't much blame anybody wanting to go back for $10 because there is no way that you can survive. So many of the jobs that they're trying to offer to these veterans who have a lot of experience, they only want to pay them minimum wage or they only want to pay $10. So that's another thing that we're going to have to begin to discuss is, raising the wages so that these veterans can get what they need to get. And like you said, we need to stop selling our stuff to over the seas or over, to foreign entities and giving them the opportunity to take what our veterans have fought so hard to do.
I'm going to be honest. I think that they should not have to pay for health care. They've served this country and they did it in a capacity that a lot of us wouldn't have the guts to do it on a daily basis. And they fought some hell of a wars. I just think that we have to do a better job of taking care of them. A couple of years ago, we had a big old freeze where a lot of people lost their lives.
Yeah.
There seemed to be no answers for what happened. To me, there were no answers. I mean, I haven't seen anything kind of change.
Get ready. Because you're about to hear one.
Well, here it is. This is the one. What will you do to make sure that this never happens again? Because I'm going to be honest with y'all. I go to Minneapolis all the time. And I happen to be in Minneapolis in December. And the temperature, I woke up one morning and it was -6. The lights never flickered. They never went out. Nothing happened. And honestly, it made me nervous because I know if this was Texas, we'd probably be, an icicle at this point. So what would you do to make sure that this never happened again? Daniel?
Look, I'm all over this one. But I think it's important to understand why what happened, right? And to understand that, you've got to go all the way back to the Obama administration and talk about green energy subsidies, right? So the federal government passed a bunch of green energy reforms and offered government subsidies through the states to people that produced wind and solar. Okay. Now you'll hear it talked about in Texas laws, Chapter 313 subsidies, which expired this last session. But so effectively what happened was all these companies, all of these politicians lined up at the trough to feed off of taxpayer money. And when they did that, you had a lot of baseline power production projects like coal, natural gas, You had a lot of those projects that were either in the planning stages or in mid-construction stages that shut down. Okay, now that's baseline power production, right? Unlike renewables, it doesn't care what the temperature is, right? It's going to gen out electricity regardless. That is your baseline power production. So consequently, over the years, as these subsidies, as people lapped up these Chapter 313 subsidies, you had more and more of our overall power generation being consumed by renewables, by wind and solar. So you go out in West Texas, you see windmills everywhere. You know, you've got these solar farms. Well, so what happened during Snowpocalypse 2021? Well, because the government put its thumb on the scales and upset the market balance and essentially made the baseline power production facilities where they could not compete, so they didn't get built. You had over 20% of our power generation coming from renewables, which absolutely during Snowpocalypse 2021 failed. So it went from well over 20% down to, I think it was like 7 or 8%. We were literally within just a shy over 4 minutes of an entire electrical grid collapse because of this. And we had to go to the federal government and actually beg to get electricity pumped into our grid. And the federal government said, yeah, as long as it's also produced by renewables, which is a joke. So that's the situation. We understand that taxpayer subsidies created this problem by upsetting the market forces. And so therefore you had baseline that could not compete. So here's what needs to be done. Number one, if you want it to never happen again, you've got to make sure that the Chapter 313 subsidies are dead, never to return. Now, the current Speaker of the House has promised to bring back Chapter 313 subsidies for renewables. That thing needs to be DOA. It's why you need a lieutenant governor like Daniel Miller who will go in there and make sure that those things are, a vampire with a stake in its heart, never to return from the grave again. Chapter 313 must die. In doing so, what that means is we have to encourage the growth and construction of new power plant projects. We have power plants right now that are near end of life or at end of life that will be closing sometime soon. So that means that with Chapter 313 gone and the pricing being a little more level on power generation, it means that we need to ensure that as Texans, we do everything we can to get baseline power generation plants up and running as quickly as possible. So that's number one. Number two is we need to make sure that we can effectively winterize natural gas production. And if that means building weatherized pipelines to these power facilities, that's exactly what we need to do. And number three is we need to go back and visit every bill that Senator Bob Hall has filed that would harden the grid. He has been harping on this session after session after session that we need to harden our electrical grid, not just against weather events, but against EMPs from foreign aggressors and solar storm. I mean, there are a lot of things that we need to be hardening. So we're going to have to spend money on the infrastructure to harden our grid. But you do those things, and the likelihood of what we saw back in 2021, a little over a year ago, drops to near zero.
So for me, I want to know, about putting it back on the main grid. First of all, how did we get off that main grid? There were, the power grid. And we should have stayed connected to that, in my opinion. I don't think that we would have had that problem, but, Texas wanted to be by itself. Now, I have another spin to this, and I'm just going to throw it out, and you can, Daniel, if you think that I'm kind of going out somewhere else, just let me know. But I saw this, and when I looked into this, the first concern that I had was that ERCOT was a 501c4. Which means that it was created for lobbying. And then you had our legislative leaders who were actually the owners within this co-op that were a part of ERCOT. Now, prior to the grid failing, Governor Abbott wrote a bill that reversed oversight of the Public Utilities Commission as to the oversight of how much money, which is the reason why they were able to pay this, this $9,000. So when I kept looking into this was basically what they considered a co-op. And many of the lobbying people or the legislative leaders owned companies within this particular co-op. And in my opinion, it seems to me that they may have been, I'm going to say, shells that really didn't exist. So now we got a bunch of companies that went bankrupt. You got a lobbying firm that claimed to be an energy company. Now, at the end of that, and I have, I wrote this all down, but at the end of that, the people of the state of Texas was paying fees through our telecommunication and our garbage. And the monies were going to the bank accounts of those legislative leaders through a co-op. Now, this is what I found when I researched ERCOT. Had nothing to do with actual, winterizing of the thing. And this is the reason why we had it, because they no longer were attached to the Public Utilities Commission. There was no oversight because Greg Abbott had reversed that. And then my question is that, if we are dealing with a lobbying entity, a co-op sort of creation that was created by Abbott and the rest of these people, then again, we're going to have to focus on that as well as how do we deal with that when we go and become governor or lieutenant governor, and dealing with the fact that the agencies or these companies that they supposedly have created really didn't exist, Daniel.
Yeah, look, the ERCOT thing is a mess. I mean, if you go back and you look at SB1, one of the things you find is that it really did not do anything substantive other than make sure that at least the board of ERCOT were Texans, unlike half of the board when the lights went out, right?
Right.
There were people on that board that were not even in Texas, didn't live in Texas. In fact, one of them, and I think it was the vice chair, his academic background was carbon credit auctions. That's what he did his academic study on, which is like, yeah, okay, well, now we understand why we had 20 some odd % of our power generation in renewables. But look, I think that this really goes back to what you mentioned a moment ago at the very beginning, which is Texas having its own grid. We have to remember that, while we had this one power situation and it was near catastrophic, the fact of the matter is that we have had effectively over the years, at least until they started shifting to renewables, we've had an extremely reliable power grid. With the exception, and of course, we're down here in Hurricane Alley too. So, we understand what hurricanes can do, but by and large, we've had a very stable power grid, unlike the West Coast interconnect, right? Which is, California, the Pacific Northwest, all those guys that effectively have rolling brownouts every time there's bad weather. Those guys are doing, even when there is no weather event, those guys are having rolling brownouts and blackouts. So, that's been the thing. But although we had this catastrophic issue, we know that the reform bill that we got for ERCOT was insufficient because, look at what they did when they replaced the ERCOT board members. Go look at the people they put on the ERCOT board. Those guys were all there, not by virtue of the fact that they are geniuses in electrical generation or distribution. It's all because they wrote fat checks to the governor and lieutenant governor. I mean, those guys are all major campaign donors. So I don't know that we've had any real reform whatsoever, but I am totally in favor of maintaining our separate grid because it needs to be under our control, but let's put it under true, proper public oversight and not under some unelected board of donors and cronies that have no transparency whatsoever, because that is the effect, Deirdre, of what they have done with ERCOT is by having it in a 501c4 or whatever kind of corporate formation it is, they have eliminated a layer of transparency and public oversight. Granted, the PUC still ultimately has authority over public utilities, but as an independent corporation like ERCOT, they have no accountability or transparency under the Texas Open Records Act, and that has to stop.
Yes, and I agree. Thank you. That's exactly.
Well, we're gonna get on to our last question. It's funny you mentioned SB1. Voter integrity is a big issue in the state of Texas. Now, myself, I've found voter fraud. I've found massive voter fraud. I know it exists. Do you feel that SB1 has hindered anybody's ability to cast their vote? Because I don't feel it has. But I'm not the one being interviewed tonight. So do you feel that the voter integrity laws that were strengthened, and some say some of the toughest voter laws in the state of Texas, do you feel that this law is suppressive in its nature? Deidre?
In a nutshell, I'm going to say no. Now, when I looked at the bill itself, I'm going to say that it created more barriers in some areas to make it harder for one to, I'm going to say not to vote, but to get the necessary components that you need to vote. Okay. Now, I don't have a problem because, when we went to the voting booths and the voting polls, we always had to have our driver's license to show some sort of ID. So in my opinion, I don't see that there was an issue as it relates to suppression. Again, if you're living in areas where, and especially during the pandemic, when all of the organizations are closed down, you can't go to the driver's license, your DPS, you can't get your license as quickly as you did before. So that may be an issue of concern, but SB1 as a whole.
But who would it be a concern for? Because
which one?
If you're a United States citizen, then you use your driver's license almost on a daily basis.
Okay, and that could be true, but let me tell you, most of the veterans that we got are coming to our play don't have a driver's license. They don't have driver's license. Many people who have been incarcerated who should have those documents in hand prior to them being released from prison, that's not occurring. So they're not getting some of these documentations. You have a lot of people who are, being displaced, going from state to state, losing their everything in storms. So they lose all of these documents and don't have them. Some people just don't understand the power of a driver's license. And so many people were just getting IDs.
But you can use a state issued ID.
Not anymore for the jobs that they're trying to give people. But if you want to work,
I'm gonna be tough on you, Madam Governor.
I want you to be tough because I'm telling you,
we're not talking about them getting jobs.
Absolutely, but
about them voting. So, like when you say people getting out of jail, well, normally when you get out on probation and parole, you normally have about 30 days to get you a driver's license.
No, that's not how it works. I've been in conversation with some people who have been incarcerated, and some prisoners who have been, that's what we do on a daily basis. And basically, it's supposed to be set up where prior to them being released, this is supposed to be a part of Texas law, where they should be issued all of this, or at least have this into place by the time that they get out. That's not occurring.
You can't vote when you get out if you're on parole.
But you don't have a driver's license either. You don't
Well,
have you can't get your driver's license now.
well, and I get that, but I'm not gonna let you off the hook. I
And
love
I'm
you to
good.
death, but I ain't
I'm
gonna let you
ready.
off the hook.
I'm ready.
What I'm saying
Okay.
is, I get the fact that they don't have a driver's license,
Yeah.
but we're talking
Mhm.
about a driver's license or a Texas issued ID to vote in these elections. Now
Right.
they're saying that it's making it harder for people to get, or well, I don't remember my social when I signed up.
Mm-hmm.
First of all, the last couple of weeks, Daniel and Deidre, they even went to the extreme to say, let's let them use their library cards to vote. Well, you can't get a library card unless you got a driver's license or ID. You can't get
Right.
public assistance unless you have a driver's license or ID. Nobody has a problem. Nobody's complaining about having a license to get public assistance. But now when it comes to voting, it's a big issue. So what I think it is,
Yes.
all those people that Daniel said they're letting across the border,
Mm-hmm.
they want to make it easy for them to vote without documentation. And that is one of our fundamental rights, to be able to vote for our democracy in this country. And I think that you
Mm-hmm.
should be able to identify yourself to pull it off.
I mean, you should be I mean, we've been doing that forever, Jerry. Well, we've always had to show our driver's license to vote. So I'm not real sure why we're having the issue now. I'm going to tell you, since the pandemic, those offices have been closed. These people are having a hard time getting these licenses back or trying to get a license, even your social security card. In order for you to get your social security card right now, you have to send your original driver's license in the mail to the social security office. Well, you don't even have a driver's license, so how are you going to get your social security card? And they want you to send your original one through the mail, which it could take forever to get there, or you can lose it. But that is what they're doing now. So when I talk about, now that would be, I would call a barrier. Now that's a barrier to the voting process. But does it stop you from voting, or does the SB1 stop you from voting? No, it doesn't. You do have barriers here that are now put into place that was not here 2 years ago. So all of this was really done too during the pandemic. Your court systems are closed. You have a lot of entities that are still shut down, and people are not personally able to go inside of these facilities right now. And so I deal with it every day.
So, Daniel, let me say this. When I studied the numbers from the 2018 election, the early ballots as well as the mail ballots as well as early voting, the mail ballots itself, especially in this election in Harris County, is down. It's way down. It's way down. So I think that the people in the state of Texas should thank one man for those laws being tightened up. His name is Rodney Ellis. See, if they could have made a bill just for Harris County, they would have made a bill just for Harris County based on the cheating that's going on in the elections in Harris County. You see what I'm saying? But they couldn't do that. It had to affect the whole state of Texas. So, Daniel, is the bill suppressive? I've read all 31 pages of it. Is this bill suppressive, and does it stop people from voting?
Well, it stops people from voting that perhaps should not be voting, right? But
Yeah.
look, let's be honest. When it comes to the issue of election integrity, our vote is power. I mean, that's the bottom line. Article 1, Section 2 of the Texas Constitution begins with the words, all political power is inherent in the people, right?
Mhm.
So it is the most powerful act, and the
Yes, it
decisions
is.
we make in a vote are going to be the ones that affect all of us. So
Yeah.
there can be no election that is too secure, because at the moment someone votes that is not supposed to vote, or someone's vote is stolen, it dilutes and harms everyone. And I mean everyone. And so that I don't find, honestly, I find that the bill that passed a bit weaker than I would prefer, because number one, Number one, they reduced felony election crimes
Yes.
down to misdemeanors, which should have never happened. Number two, they left out that one of the things that should have been done was they should have added election crimes to the Texas RICO statute so that
Yes.
they could prosecute organized criminal activity related to elections as organized crime. But finally, the other thing that they should have done was they should have absolutely either completely done away with electronic voting and went to auditable paper ballots, or at a minimum made an absolute requirement to follow the law when it comes to the auditing of these elections. It is a concern, and the fact that we have so many people that are concerned about the integrity of our elections means that they're whether something is there or not, it means that people's concerns still need to be addressed, because if people don't have faith in the elections, you cannot have a constitutional republic. It is impossible to do so. So, yeah, I mean, is it suppressive? I don't believe that it is. I mean, Texas has one of the most open policies known to man. You basically, for ID, you could scrawl your name with a Sharpie on a ketchup packet and draw a stick figure and go, "This is me," and they would let you vote. I mean, they gave so many doggone exceptions to the thing. So I would honestly like to see early voting shrunk down from 2 weeks to a much shorter time period, and emphasis placed on election day, a return to auditable, trackable paper ballots, the enhancement of all election crimes into felonies, and including them in the RICO statutes, and then aggressively prosecute this sort of thing, whether it comes from election officials or individuals. The fact of the matter is there can be no election to secure, period.
So I have a question as well, is because I've been talking to some of the election administrators within Fort Bend County, and there were some irregularities, as I would call them. And basically they made claim that they really didn't have jurisdiction over the election itself, and that the parties were more so the ringleaders. So is that a true statement, that the parties are more so the ringleaders of the election than it is the election committees or our election?
Look, not to freak anybody out, but I know for a fact that within the first week of early voting, the Republican Party of Texas Election Integrity Office already had over 1,000 complaints of election irregularities. You've got counties right now that are not using consecutively numbered ballots, as is required by the new law.
Okay.
And those very same people are doing it on purpose and relying on a 4-year-old opinion from the Attorney General's office as their rationale from circumventing the law. And you've got an Attorney General's office who was put on notice about this back in November of last year and refused to make a statement on it until 180 days after. So in other words, when the primaries are over. So I think everyone should be hyper vigilant about what's happening in this election right now. We know that the lieutenant governor, under the official seal of his office, the current lieutenant governor, in violation of the law, sent mail-in ballots to people 65 and over. And of course, his idiot political consultant put a return address on it to the Secretary of State's office. So, all of those ballots that people use are going to get thrown out. They're because the Secretary of State can't process those. They have to go back to the election administrator in the county. So, we're seeing flagrant violations of this law. A law that was supported by the people supposedly that are the ones that helped get it passed. And so, look, here's the bottom line. And this is what I've got to say on the matter. Many years ago, I ran for state representative in 2012. And when I was trying to figure out what my target vote total should be, I talked to a sitting state rep and I asked him, I said, look, help me understand, how many votes should I target? He says, you can run all the calculations you want to, but here's what you got to remember. You got to win beyond the margin of theft. Now, that was 2012.
Yes.
2012. So it's not like this election integrity stuff is brand new. The fix on so many of these things has been going on for a long time. And just now the people are waking up and they're fed up with it. They want fair elections, and they want to be able to trust that when they cast their ballot for people like us that it counts, that it matters, and it won't be swallowed up by a bunch of ballot stuffers who think that this is Jim Crow Texas all over again.
Well, I will say for those out there that want to know, I've never been required to count jelly beans in a jar when I went to vote. I've never paid a poll tax.
Mm-hmm.
I've never had to recite every county in the state of Texas. So I don't feel my vote has been suppressive. Now, what I have been, long time ago in the past, I was lazy and I didn't go vote early and I got stuck on election day in them long lines. Instead of waiting for tomorrow, you had 2 weeks prior that you could have went in there. Nobody's in the building, takes you every bit of, now it takes about 10 minutes to vote. You could have got it done. But I honestly feel that, I'm running for state rep in House District 131. And I want to strengthen those laws because I've been cheated out of 2 elections. And I know I have. Mm-hmm. So, it's not sour grapes. So I'm just in my feelings because I lost. I mean, anytime somebody can send me word and say on election night, we're coming out the gate with 2,800 votes and they come out with 2,859, you cooking the books. You cooking the books. So I think that the laws should be tightened up. Mm-hmm. I think that they should, it just needs to be what it needs to be. And I agree with you, Daniel. They should be felonies and these people should be sent to jail. That's all it boils down to. Well, I want to give y'all.
But a misdemeanor, right, allows them to keep their positions.
I mean, yeah, but I mean,
that you saw that play out here in Fort Bend, where
I don't know how it is in other parts of Texas, but between Fort Bend County and Harris County, man, there's so much cheating going on down here, man. You couldn't get a straight game of dice if you wanted one. It ain't gonna happen. So, it is what it is. They may get upset, but I mean, they cooking the books down this way. So, one, I want to thank you for taking the time out to come sit down with me tonight. So, I'm going to give the floor to Ms. Deidre. Final statements.
My final statement is that, we need to look at who we are choosing to be in leadership. We need a change. We need things to be changed in the state of Texas. We've talked about quite a bit tonight. We've talked about the border. We talked about the grid. We talked about education and voter integrity. All of these things are what's going on in the state of Texas. As Daniel stated earlier, you just pick something and we are in it. And we need to change that. And the only way it's going to be changed is by picking and choosing people and putting people in office that care about the state of Texas and care about integrity, period. And I just say that, I will be on the November ballot. I will be out there stomping the pavement. And I'm looking forward to being the next governor of the state of Texas. And I'm looking forward to seeing Daniel on the road. I just want to say to you that you really talk the way I like to listen to people talk about what's going and not afraid to speak the truth. And that is what has been missing in politics, is the truth. Most people think that the truth is being negative. The truth is real and the truth is needed in politics in Texas right now. And that is my final statement.
Deirdre, thank you. Thank you very much.
Final thoughts.
Yeah. Look, here's the bottom line. I know Deirdre's got until November. I have until tomorrow, unless we go to a runoff and then, toward the Democrat in November. So I've either got a very short time ahead of me or a lot of weeks to get this done. But here's what I believe. I believe that the next 100 years of Texas history are being written right now, right? And I think the question becomes how we want future generations to remember us. Mm-hmm. The bottom line is that we either write our own future or it gets written for us. And frankly, for many of us, that next 100 years of history starts tomorrow on March the 1st during the primaries. And so, this is one of the reasons that I'm running to become the next lieutenant governor of the great state of Texas. Because I believe that Texas stands on the precipice We stand at the edge of an abyss, and one way is safety and security, and the other way, Texas goes into oblivion, and future generations will never know Texas as we have known Texas. There are so many critical issues in this race, and it's one of the reasons that I have absolutely pledged to, as Lieutenant Governor, to make legislation happen that will secure the border, abolish the immoral property tax, end employer-mandated vaccines, push back against the federal government, give the people of Texas a vote on reasserting our status as an independent nation, to tackle the issues that are facing us with school choice, to make sure that parents are always the primary stakeholders in their children's education, and to advance policies that improve the lives of every single solitary Texan. So I think about the words that my friend Mark Myers, who is the Lavaca County judge, said in one of his campaign ads this cycle, where he said, we don't get the government we hope for, we get the government that we vote for. And that's where we're at. So tomorrow I'm asking everyone who was within the sound of my voice, who's watching this, to go out and cast their vote for me, to vest me with your trust and your faith to become the next Lieutenant Governor of the state of Texas. Article 1, Section 2 of the Texas Constitution starts with the words that all political power is inherent in the people. And so tomorrow, let's just go show them how powerful we can be. So, Jerry, Deirdre, thank you so much for your time. It's been a pleasure tonight.
I tell you what, I'm gonna close it out with this here. Tomorrow is the beginning of your future.
Mm-hmm.
If you're sick and
really
tired of being sick and tired, and you want these politicians out of office that you feel have not represented you to the highest capacity, then make it happen. Get to the polls, make it happen. And after tomorrow, those that have been waiting, I don't know what you call me. I think I'm the flyest politician in the country. We're going to crank it up, and we going for the goal. We treat not 131 like a battleground state. And we're going to go out here and we're going to flip these voters, and we're going to make a difference. And I think that's what all three of us sitting on this panel want to do, get in a position to be able to make a difference. Say, man, it's a reason I'm the best in the business. Every night, Facebook, YouTube, Twitter. I want to thank my guests, future Governor Deidre Gilbert, future Lieutenant Governor Daniel Miller, endorsed by me. You know who I am. I'm the 5-star general. It's election day tomorrow. And excuse my French, but like my mama used to say, you're going to have to shit or get off the pot. It's going down tomorrow. No excuses. But I will tell you this, somebody going home mad. But always remember, you too can be a Republican. I'll holler at you tomorrow night.